Hi, I'm Helen Marie. Welcome to my podcast, I Don't Think We Talk Enough About. Today, I am talking with the wonderful Emma Reed Turrell. Emma is a psychotherapist and runs a busy therapy practice alongside training and consulting. Following the success of her debut book, Please Yourself, How to Stop People Pleasing and Transform the Way You Live, Emma has written a second book, What Am I Missing? Discover the 4 blind spots that are holding you back and how to overcome them. She also presented the popular podcast Best Friend Therapy with Elizabeth Day and is now the host of her very own podcast, Friendship Therapy. This episode was such a fun one to record. Emma and I definitely wouldn't have been allowed to sit next to each other at school. We chat and laugh way too much. However, Emma brings such warmth, wisdom and expertise to this podcast. She helps us identify our blind spots, which may be holding us back from breaking those cycles of behaviour in life that we know just aren't fundamentally good for us. Emma helps us answer that $1 million question, what am I missing? Welcome, Emma.
Thank you.
You are to me a bit of a podcasting queen.
Aww.
And I know from the intro that I've given everyone your credentials, but it's honestly such a pleasure to have you here on my podcast.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Don't be silly, don't be silly. So the podcast is called, I always struggle with the name and I'm already thinking I probably should have called it something else, but we're going to go with it.
Keep practicing.
I even say it wrong many times.
Okay.
So it is the I Don't Think We Talk Enough About. And then I've brought in your book that you've written, which is out now, called What Am I Missing?
Which is even more of a mouthful when you start saying, I don't think we talk enough about what am I missing?
All about blind spots.
It is about blind spots, exactly that.
So I thought it would be really helpful if you could just give us an indication or a description of what blind spots are and how you came about to come up with this new theme, which we'll dive into.
I'd love to. And I think it does. It marries so well, doesn't it? Because we get into therapy because we realise, well, I speak for myself, but maybe many therapists, we realise there were so many things that we didn't talk about, that weren't talked about, that then we become interested in starting to lift lids and we want to talk about everything. And the more I lift lids, the more I realise that when there's a great big pot with a lid on that's not being opened, that becomes sort of catnip to me as a therapist.
Okay.
And it started to be this idea of blind spots, this area of what I describe as low or no awareness.
Okay.
And I liken it to the blind spot that we all know about if we've ever driven a car where you're going down the motorway and if you've had sufficient driving instruction, you will know that actually it's not okay to just take a look in a wing mirror with a passing glance and pull out into traffic. If you're going to change lanes, if you're going to make any kind of intervention or movement in your life, it's really important that you can see what's there first. So these blind spots, these areas of low or no awareness that, at least in my understanding, begin when we're little, as does so much, and then become reinforced as we get older. And they become pockets of kind of blurry information in our peripheral vision that we bump into or we trip over or we stumble on. And every now and then we think, how have I ended up in this position again? This same relationship with this same toxic personality. How am I being overlooked at work again for a promotion? Why am I arguing about the dishwasher and who stacks it? There is something here that I am missing. What is it? And it's those conversations in a therapy room with clients where they would say, I don't get it, Emma. I don't get it. What am I missing? That led to this idea about, well, let's see if we can figure out, broadly speaking, what different types of people are often missing, what's in their blind spot, so that they can develop enough perspective to be able to not necessarily do anything differently, but to act with information.
Okay, so bringing into awareness.
Yeah. And recognising, I suppose, in a way that it doesn't make me a very popular therapist, but to be able to say, yeah, you're right, you are the common denominator. And that's not necessarily what we want to hear, is it?
And you're so right, we struggle with it, don't we?
Yeah.
I notice, I will come obviously a bit further along in a minute, but there's something I've noticed on Instagram, we're both on Instagram, that when I put a post on that infers that the person reading it might be responsible for an action.
Yeah.
No engagement. Like none. And I always keep my likes on, so it's not a problem. And so people can see that, like, zero interaction.
Yes.
No one wants to see that. The moment I put on a post about other people,
Right.
ping, 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 viral content. But it's not just a coincidence. It happens every single time. I infer that it could be you. Not interested.
No, and I find that fascinating because for me, and again, we can come on to this and the reason that I'm a certain profile, I much prefer the idea that I have some control. I much prefer the idea that actually, well, if I am the common denominator, oh my goodness, I could actually make a difference here. I could change this rather than be blown about by the weather of the world.
But do we have the luxury as therapists of knowing how we can work through that? Whereas maybe people who haven't gone into the therapy world yet don't quite know how they could ever see that or view it like that.
Yeah, and I think you could extend that point and say, do we have the luxury as privileged white women doing a podcast, having an education, being able to actually operate in this world in the way that we can? That again gives us that level of privilege, doesn't it, to be able to say, great, tell me what difference I can make to my life because I have agency. And I suppose we have to absolutely acknowledge that to have agency is a privilege.
Yeah.
What I hope to achieve through the book is to say you may not have full agency, but where you do have some, where you could make a difference, why not find out actually if your assumptions are right? Wouldn't it be great to find out that you weren't entirely right when you believed whatever limiting belief that was?
Oh, what emotional maturity.
Well, I guess that's the hope.
Wow. Okay, so let's move on to the profiles.
Yes.
Now, there's 4.
There are.
This I found incredibly exciting because it had me reminiscing about poring over my horoscope as a teenager. Like, tell me who I am. What am I? What can I do?
Yeah.
But it was also, I feel like I'm using Gen Z language, giving me a bit of internal family system stuff too.
Yes.
And it felt quite strong for me that, and I know we're going to get into the profiles and it'll make more sense as we come through the podcast, but there were real elements of how they could apply to parts of us and bits of us, and some of us might be that and bits of us aren't and bits of us are. So I'm going to hand it to you to tell me what those 4 are.
Well, I love the fact that you were likening it to the horoscopes because when I wrote these 4 profiles, I was channeling my inner Just 17.
Oh, all of that.
More Magazine, Cosmopolitan, and you could kind of follow down one of those really gorgeous flowcharts that's like, which 90s heartthrob is your dream guy? And you could just follow A, and then if B is B, and this for me was heaven,
and it must be true.
Identity.
It must be true,
right?
It is
Keanu
true.
Reeves every time, so it's true.
Tom Cruise.
Oh, too
So
short.
funny.
Sorry, Tom, if you're listening. But the profiles, you're right, they're about, I suppose, giving people hooks to hang their thinking off. And we know that humans, we love categories. It helps us identify with and differentiate from. So I love the idea that actually, even in this conversation, you've picked up that idea of, oh, great, there are categories. I can get into what am I? But I can also start to notice, well, that bit of me, but maybe not that bit of me. And not with that person, but definitely with that person. And not all the time, but in the past.
Hugely.
And this is all about differentiation and also not being separate, I suppose. Something about recognizing our similarities and our differences. But the profiles that I came up with, which I had great fun doing, they were all about our relationship to need.
Okay.
So I had a flowchart up on the whiteboard in my office.
You've got a whiteboard?
I have a whiteboard.
Oh.
My husband put it up on the wall. Make that note. You need a whiteboard. I also recommend some flip chart paper.
Oh,
blue tack,
flip chart.
Post-it notes.
I need it all.
You need it all because as soon as you have that, you're workshopping.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. It can be a Tuesday afternoon, you're workshopping. I did many workshops with my husband with a gin and tonic with the whiteboard.
Brilliant.
Really helps flow. The thing with the relationship with need was all about whether or not you can recognise you have needs. And if you do recognise that you have needs, how you think those needs will get met, what influence you have over that, whether you're beholden to others, whether you have autonomy. So I started off with one called The Rock.
Yes.
Spoiler alert, this is me.
Oh.
And many therapists.
Yes, I really felt that when I read it.
And many, many people in the caring profession. This rock, when I was writing The Rock, this is the hard relate for me. This is the one where somebody is, what's their relationship with need? Well, they don't really have needs. They work with other people's needs, which is quite often the closest they will get to need and vulnerability is sorting out other people's problems. Fixing other people, being there, shoulder to cry on, thick skin, broad-shouldered. If you've got responsibility, give it to me.
Yeah.
I'll take it on.
Yeah.
I can do it. There's something about that resilience and self-containment that comes with a rock.
Yes.
It does mean that they can be a rescuer. They can be the one that people go to.
Yeah.
It also means that they can forget about their own needs, and that might help them in some ways if they're not necessarily comfortable having needs, but also it means that they rarely get those needs met.
Yeah.
And it can mean that at times they can seem distant or cool or emotionally detached, or as my husband calls me, a Scandinavian ice queen.
Oh.
At times.
Wow.
I mean, the Scandinavian bit is true.
Was that the bit you loved about The Rock?
I mean, this is it, right? My mother is Swedish. I swear that she is a kind of Viking, just reincarnated.
Okay.
My whole upbringing was 2 rocks at the top.
Okay.
My dad was a vet. He learnt how to effectively dissociate so that he could take these animals and a profession in which he'd joined because of his love for animals.
Of course.
And then actually treat them and potentially euthanize them. This was something about how on earth does somebody compartmentalise to be able to do that? Well, luckily he was a rock.
Yes.
So with parents who are rocks, there tends to be a bit of rockery that trickles down. So for me, mine was very much about actually this Viking line of when the going gets tough, the tough get going. You just get on with it. You know?
Mirrored behaviour.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly no attunement or, I mean, my parents were very, very loving in very, very practical ways. It was all acts of service. It was all about supporting somebody in a doing sense, not in a feeling sense.
Okay. Yeah.
So these rocks, they tend to go on, and I say, quite often get into caring professions.
Yes, I did really resonate with that a lot. Yeah. And we'll come in a minute as well to why those profiles develop.
Yeah, great idea.
So
great.
I don't know if we want to carry on through all of them or whether...
Let's do it until we go through.
Okay.
Why not? So those rocks, you mean, I kind of gave you my own case study there as such, and case studies are very much part of the book that I use clients I've worked with.
Loved them.
And it helps so much.
It does.
It's that idea of here is a real story, admittedly anonymised, that says, and how it applies.
Yes, hugely.
So many rocks come to me in therapy and say, I don't know, maybe I've got to midlife or something's changed in my relationship. I don't know what's wrong. I'm just not happy. There's nothing wrong in my life. I'm just not happy.
So often.
And I have to start at that beginning space of, can you recognise how you feel, what you need, before we can work out how to get it or give it to you?
It's a really hard question, isn't it? If you're saying they're coming at that stage, they've never really asked themselves that question before.
No.
And then it's very hard to answer that. I see them stuck in the therapy room with that question.
Me too, because so often that, you know, as you say, how does it start? Well, it starts with some of those conditioned messages around what's strength, what's weakness, what brings their caregiver closer, what moves their caregiver further away.
Well, we're touching on attachment theory here, aren't we? And I kept thinking, are you going to link it to attachment theory soon as I was reading?
Yeah.
And then you did.
Yes.
And I was like, brilliant. And then, phew, hoping we're on the same path here. And then you brought up that cheese analogy. Do we have time to mention the cheese analogy?
You tell me.
I think we have. The cheese analogy is brilliant. I've never heard it before.
I know.
But it's so brilliant at describing attachment theory, where I love, obviously, Bowlby's work's amazing, and Mary Ainsworth, but you have to really delve into it to really get it, don't you?
Totally.
And obviously with pop psychology out there at the moment, people are not understanding the nuances maybe of it.
Yeah.
So the cheese analogy I felt was a very effective bridge, but let's not get confused with your profiling.
My profile.
No, sorry. But so do you want to just tell us a bit?
Happily. So first of all credit to Colby Pierce, because it's his introduction in a book about attachment theory that talks first about mice and cheese. And his story, unbeknownst to me, was translated to me by a supervisor. So when I actually heard the story about the cheese, it was secondhand through a supervisor who also had made her own changes to it. So what we end up with is one of these beautiful kind of mythical stories that's travelled through a therapeutic community and landed with me. Well, that was 25 years ago, so the story I tell now is different again. But there's something about mice and cheese that I think just speaks to us, and it's all about whether or not we're going to get fed. So in this story, there are several little mice, and one of those little mice we would call securely attached. And this mouse, every time that mouse is hungry, he can hit a button on a cheese machine and cheese comes out. And every time that mouse needs food, all that mouse has to do is hit the button and cheese comes out. And when he doesn't need food, nothing happens. When he doesn't touch the button, nothing happens. His whole relationship with that cheese machine is, if I need it, my need will be met. Therefore, I can actually head off about my mousy business all day, getting on with my life.
Oh, how wonderful.
I know. Enjoying my freedom, feeling super confident that as and when I have a need, I'll be okay.
Yeah.
We call him securely attached.
Wonderful.
Then we have the next little category of mice, and these are the mice who are not securely attached in different ways. So I talk about this mouse who would be insecurely attached in an ambivalent way. And this mouse, when the mouse hits the cheese machine, cheese comes out, apart from when it doesn't. And then sometimes when the mouse doesn't hit the button, cheese comes out, apart from when it doesn't. Suddenly there is a random arbitrary quality to this cheese machine, which means, yes, you might get some cheese, but you might not. Yeah. And you don't know when you're going to get it. Yeah. And it might not be when you need it. And you might not be hungry, or you might be starving at this point. So that mouse cannot go about its mousy business, safe in the knowledge its needs will be met. That mouse has to stay very close to that cheese machine, preferably hitting the button way more often.
Yeah, multiple
times. Yeah. That mouse doesn't even have to be able to feel the hunger to hit the button because it has to stockpile the cheese for lean times. So we have this mouse orbiting this cheese machine, unable to actually live independently. And then we have the next mouse. The next mouse we would also call insecurely attached, but avoidantly so.
Yeah.
And I recognise this attachment style, and this does track with rocks quite often. Yeah. That sense that actually we go up, we hit the cheese machine, nothing comes out. Try again, nothing came out. Try again, well, still nothing came out. Or something very small, just a morsel, make it last. Suck the cheese, don't chew it, because this has got to kind of be enough.
It's got to sustain you for a while.
It's got to sustain you. There is scarcity here. But unfortunately, being in relationship with that cheese machine that is either withholding or empty, because when we're little and we're a mouse, we don't know what the reason is, means that we have to either stay really hungry and reconcile ourselves to that feeling, or we have to do probably what is more like psychic survival and switch off the feeling of hunger. Find a way to numb it out.
Yeah.
So that actually we can turn our back on that cheese machine entirely and head off into the cheeseless wilderness. Yeah. Preferably avoiding cheese machines wherever they pop up in our life because we don't really trust them.
No.
We certainly don't depend on them. We're not going to rely on them.
No.
And that mouse, when we call it avoidantly attached, makes the third of the fourth. The fourth one we would call disorganized as an attachment style. And this mouse, this is the one that we see in I would say, the deepest pain. The mouse who at times got fed by the machine, at times didn't, at times received some sort of electric shock from the machine in response to a trigger, but sometimes in response to nothing. Yeah. So this mouse, not only does it have a relationship where its needs aren't being met, it's also fearful of its provider.
Of course.
And those mice and that cheese machine analogy, it really helped me understand how and why we have these different relationships with need.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
I love the cheese.
I think it's brilliant.
It says so much.
It does. And I really feel, and as we go through the other profiles, I think people will start to see where that sort of fits in.
Yeah.
From less of a pop psychology sort of way. And you were talking about the avoidance style of the rock. And I remember the first time I turned up in therapy, when you're training to be a therapist, you have to have therapy, don't you? Hours of it.
Yeah.
Of that mirror being held up. And I remember being so proud. I mean, why I had to be proud of myself to go to therapy, to say to my therapist, oh, I'm so self-sufficient.
Yeah.
As if that was like a badge of honour.
It is. I'm that resilient.
I am that resilient, but I don't need anyone.
No.
And she just stopped me in my tracks and said, Helen, we all need people. I was like, no, I actually don't need people.
Yeah.
I'm fine. I'm self-sufficient.
I know.
And I remember then when I once said to her in a therapy session that I'd actually asked my husband if he wouldn't mind doing the school run because I wasn't well. And she was over the moon with me. But it was not something I'd ever asked before.
I know.
And she said, and what did he say? And I said, he said yes, and he did it. And it was just, I can ask for help. But my default was the rock. I can do it all.
Yeah, and I have to be ill. I have to be on the floor.
The Embody Lab is an online resource for embodied education, self-discovery and healing, founded by Dr. Scott Lyons, a renowned author and expert in holistic psychology and mind-body medicine. The Embody Lab is committed to making somatics and trauma healing accessible to everyone by offering virtual events, summits and certificates. The Embody Lab empowers individuals to embark on their own journey of personal growth and transformation through a diverse digital catalogue of programs and resources. Explore exclusive teachings from world-renowned experts like Gabor Mate, Bessel van der Kolk, Peter Levine, Diane Paul Heller and more. Join the Embody Lab community to deepen your healing path. I'm a huge fan of the Embody Lab, and just for you, I have a special code which gives you 10% off all of their courses, and that's Helen6788. The Embody Lab truly is a wonderful resource for your healing journey. But another aspect I loved of The Rock was they can't have fun.
No.
But I thought that was interesting because of that fear of vulnerability, not being able to show it, and just how, from a personal experience, I was reflecting on this yesterday, how through my teenage years and my early 20s, so that's all through your kind of your A-levels, your partying, your university, if you went to university, fancy dress parties, hated them. Like, just don't make me pretend to be someone else. I've only just about coping with this person. And now I love them.
Really?
And it's just having done the therapy, the work, the recognising that in me. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be not this mould of who you think you should be. Absolutely. I found that insightful reading that yesterday.
Yeah, I love that idea because there's so much in there about, you know, for me, certainly I struggle to play, and we were just chatting and talking about the fact that my children are 13 and 10 now. And it's still that aspect of playing with my children when they were little I found really hard. You know, that like, oh, I'm going to get down on my knees and we're going to do trains and I'm going to do voices and I'm a very kind of silly, jokey person in my adult friendships.
Yeah,
but with my children, I found that so hard.
Yeah, I did too.
Okay, good.
I did too.
Good. We're normal.
I really did. I really did. And I'm really sorry, Gia.
I know, because that's
really
right.
did.
So this is the rock thing then. We get whacked with guilt and shame for not being able to play. I think that's the other thing. So you get this kind of double whammy of, oh gosh, I wish I was like all the other kids who could play. So like, now I feel...
how am I meant to do this?
Exactly. What's the right way?
What's the right way?
That's the rock.
To play sitting on the floor with a horse that's meant to talk.
Exactly. And I never said the right thing.
Oh, no, I never said the right thing.
It was all wrong. And in the
you
end,
can see her face.
I know.
She's shaking it.
Yeah.
She knows I could never say the right thing. Not like that, Mummy.
Exactly. And yet, when I watch my children play together, it's like, it seems to be a completely kind of spontaneous, effortless, organic experience.
I know, but when your little one is saying, no, not like that, you buy into it. Oh,
Totally.
Even my children know I can't do it properly.
Yes.
I
know.
can't play.
I know.
My 4-year-old is telling me that.
Yeah. And this is that bit, I suppose, my origin story as a therapist is all transactional analysis. So we do a lot of parent, adult, child in that. And it's this child ego state that we just can't get into, we can't access.
Fascinating, Emma. I need to talk to you about
Whole
that another
podcast
time.
about rocks. There we
Okay,
go.
so rocks.
Okay.
We're both a rock.
We're both rocks.
But I'm not just a rock.
No, you're a bit of other stuff, aren't you?
I am. Can you see that?
I would definitely have you down as a rustler or a ridge.
Oh, the bridge element. But only from something I heard you say in a podcast that really resonated, like visceral reaction.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh,
can you remember?
You were speaking to Alex, Dr.
Yes.
Alex, about what makes someone a bridge. And I almost burst into tears. And I was like, oh, that obviously hit.
What landed?
Why you behave the way you do. They're really difficult conversations, aren't they? Because we tread around concepts that can be quite difficult to address.
Totally.
We really can.
I think that, the nature of becoming therapists is us wanting to change that, isn't it?
Yes. Break that cycle.
Yeah. I mean, I got into therapy when my boyfriend at the time said, you're completely mad. You should go to therapy because this is all you and you're a psycho. And I took him at his word. I was like, yeah, you're right. I'm the problem. I should go to get therapy. Obviously, very quickly in therapy, I then thought, it would appear to not actually be me that's the issue.
How fascinating. But without that interaction, you wouldn't be here today.
And he was a gladiator. He was my second profile. So he was the...
should we do that?
Well, why not? So this gladiator is the second profile that I identify. And this is the person who, unlike a rock, who would say, me, I don't have any needs. I don't need anything. The gladiator does have needs and is very comfortable needing what they need and expecting that need to be met and or taking what they need. Which is not to say that this is in any way more or less healthy than any of the other profiles. It's still an adaptation. And so much of this, as you said, is how did it happen? Well, these are these adaptations. And our gladiator typically has adapted from a space where either they were encouraged to be direct, because a gladiator can be very confident, very forthright, very dogmatic, very persevering, very ambitious, very successful. We have a lot of CEOs who I would profile as gladiators. This is a very potent profile. Where it can have a problem is where they lack empathy. So for each of the blind spots, I talk about what's the missing piece.
Yes.
So we recognize that rock might be missing some vulnerability. The gladiator typically is missing some empathy.
Okay.
And some trust in others, actually. So
they're not trusting others.
Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
So a little, some avoidant in there as well?
Some avoidant in there.
Okay.
And an ability, though, unlike the cheese machine mouse who would walk away from the cheese machine, this one gets the crowbar out.
Oh, wow.
And helps themselves. And why not? Because actually their view of the world is, let's all do that.
Yeah. Survive. Really survive.
Yeah. And actually, there is enough for everyone. The gladiator is someone who walks up to the buffet and doesn't say, after you, after you, after you. They fill their plate. And they're also very comfortable with you filling your plate. So many of the gladiators who I see in therapy, and to be fair,
you don't see many.
Very few.
No, I thought that when I read the gladiator section, I have to say with the others I was really circling and writing. I was like, that relates to that and that person. I'm seeing this, and I was like, oh, there's nothing.
Yeah.
I just haven't got many gladiators in my therapy room.
And I see them mostly in couples work, because there'll be one of the couple who has come in and they don't understand why there is a problem in this relationship. As far as they understand, everybody's taking and doing and getting what they need from this relationship. But they can't understand that actually, no, the other person is feeling very unseen, very missed. So I typically see gladiators in that way. I also quite often see gladiators in my corporate work. So where there is someone, and they quite often come for coaching. They're interested in coaching.
Ah, okay.
And what they end up getting is therapy.
Yes.
Because it's what they kind of wanted.
Do they are they amenable to it? Do you?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I mean, it's one of these kind of gently catch you monkey kind of situations.
Okay, yeah.
But there is something about, I mean, I absolutely love my gladiator clients because they're always a lot of fun. There's always sparks. There's always kind of like that conflict challenge piece.
Okay.
And they're up for it.
Yeah.
You know, there is something here about their expectation is that they need you to tell them straight and tell them how it is because that's how they operate.
Okay.
So sometimes I think it works really well. And I think sometimes we could think that a gladiator is a less okay version than some of the other profiles. So I have to really make it clear that that's not the case. It's just a different adaptation.
A creative adjustment.
Exactly.
Exactly. I get it.
Yeah.
As I'm sat here hearing you, I'm thinking, who are the gladiators I know within therapy perspective?
Yeah.
And it probably is my clients' partners.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if I could get them through the door,
Right.
It's not that they're against it. They're pro other people. They're pro growth.
Yeah.
They just don't see it in themselves.
And they don't necessarily see the safety or value in teams.
Okay.
So there's quite often this idea that I'll see gladiators in relationships and they are brilliant cheerleaders for their partner, but they're not necessarily pulling in the same direction. It's sort of two individuals rather than a couple.
Yes, and you gave the brilliant example. I know it's not in the workplace, but about was it the Chinese restaurant?
Yeah.
They're going for dinner. I can't remember the name of the character you gave him and he was a gladiator, and the family, they're all going as a family. I mean, there's sadness to it as well, isn't there? Because the family were all wanting to do sharing plates and he didn't. It was like, no, I'm ordering my own. I'm not sharing.
Meal for one.
Yes, but missing the moment of it, of the shared moment, as if, well, you can order for one.
Yeah.
But almost missing the
Yeah.
connection of it. I don't know, something in that for me.
I totally get that. And I can remember that client really clearly because, you know, now I'm thinking only in mousy cheese terms, that what he actually did get from his cheese machine, it was his. And he didn't want to share it.
Yeah.
So there is a kind of sense of he'd had to fight so hard to get his metaphorical meal for one.
I know.
That he didn't want to share because his expectation from his beginnings was that he'd end up out of pocket, shortchanged.
Yes.
He'd get less.
And it's, as you were talking, I was really seeing his younger self in that really strong, that 7-year-old, 8-year-old boy.
Yeah.
And there's another question here. Wrongly or rightly, I felt that gladiators were more male.
Yeah.
And I wonder what responsibility society has for that as well. Because I'm conscious that I'm a mum of a son.
Yes.
He's 21 nearly. What messages have we given him? I hope not. I hope I've been more balanced.
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think as much as we would like to not make those generalizations, it's true, it's accurate. I see more male gladiators than I do see female gladiators. And I see more female gladiators struggling more with being a gladiator.
Than a male gladiator is that I'm a gladiator.
Whose
who I am.
patriarchal society says that's okay.
Yes.
And actually, the female gladiators I've worked with, sometimes we will actually reframe it and say, all of this imposter syndrome that's kicking in for you right now, if you were a man, how would you feel?
Wow,
Well, that
amazing.
Would be fine. That would be fine. I'd be sitting at the boardroom and I would be saying my piece and disagreeing and confronting, and that would be okay.
Yeah.
But it's almost as if this client that I'm remembering said, it's like I'm a man in a skirt. That was the way she described it.
Wow.
And I don't know how to be myself because this part of me that wants to be forthright, and as she called it, masculine, also wanted to be herself.
Of course.
And bring all of her other personalities, qualities.
Yeah.
But she was trying to navigate this. I'm supposed to be soft and meek and mild, and I'm not.
And I'm not.
And I'm not.
But then I think that's really important to also recognise the positives of these profiles. I don't want you to think that I've just gone down there's the bad bit, there's the bad bit.
Likewise.
Because there's so many great characteristics in a gladiator.
Totally.
That I'm sure many of us are like, I wish it was just a bit more like that.
Completely
so
agree.
we'll come to that as well. Third.
Okay, so this is our hustler.
Okay.
The hustler is, if we think about our relationship with needs, we've gone from our rock who doesn't need anything. No. I'm fine. Then we've got this gladiator who's like, yeah, I need it and it's mine by right. Then we get this hustler, which is like, oh, I do need stuff. I do need other people to help me out with this. I can't ask them directly. So what I'm going to do as a hustler is become very creative, very charming, ever so slightly manipulative, but unconsciously, in order to try to organise other people's reactions into something that gets me closer to what I need. Because fundamentally what's missing for that hustler is that idea of self-approval. So they are working very much often in a people-pleasing way to get other people to sign off on what they want, to get other people to offer them what they need.
Okay.
So they find themselves in the workplace, for instance, putting in the extra work, doing the extra hours, going above and beyond, but then being surprised that their request for annual leave wasn't signed off.
Okay.
Because I've done all of this. And actually the contract was never explicit.
Yeah.
So they find a hustler in a relationship who goes out of their way, bends over backwards to make sure everything's perfect for someone's birthday celebrations.
Oh, I know.
And then can't understand why they're not being recognised for that. Feels hurt when they're not seen.
But they didn't communicate.
They didn't communicate. And maybe not even with themselves.
No,
They didn't realise that the
it.
reason they got those helium balloons was that this person was finally going to say, you, wonderful you.
The blind spot.
Yeah.
They
So
don't
that
see
idea
it.
for them to be able to start to do yes, say yes when you mean yes, say no when you mean no.
I know.
This is the bit where you quite often see rocks, and we talked about blends, rock hustler blends.
Yes, I noticed that because I found myself jotting down saying, can I be more than one?
Oh, you can be as many as you want.
Just thinking, I'm definitely not just that, and I'm definitely a bit of that, depending on who I'm with.
Yeah,
Or,
right.
or the situation.
Yes.
And then I'm definitely another bit of that.
Yeah.
But I've also noticed that you can grow and change.
Definitely.
And not stay in one.
No.
But we'll come to that in a minute.
And you have days where you're sort of, I think this is the point, when push comes to shove, we probably all revert to one of these profiles.
Yes, I think you're right.
So under in a crisis, we will be there. But
Sorry, can I just say, I think you're right. What I mean is, you developed this, you're right.
But I mean, I'm just accepting. I'm like,
Well, I
oh,
think
thank
you're
you,
right.
Thank you for thinking I'm right. I'm very happy with that.
This is your theory. I know you're right. That's so interesting.
And that's for me. I'm just like, great, cool, thanks. But this hustler part of me that will come in sometimes, and it's like, well, what do you wear? What's expected of you in this situation? And
Or
what's
the
appropriate?
anxiety that comes in.
It does, because the hustler is so good at organising other people's reactions that actually sometimes they forget that spending all of their time occupying someone else's life means that they're never living in their own.
There's so much sadness to that because around who that person is, who they feel they are, how they feel they can show up for themselves, probably isn't even on their radar.
No.
So
Imagine
really
how safe
missing.
they have to be able to get to that point.
It takes quite a lot of therapy, doesn't it?
I think so. I would say mostly, if I was to absolutely make a kind of sweeping statement, most of my anxious clients present with some hustler.
I agree.
Yeah.
I really agree. And that the overthinkers, the perfectionists, the procrastinators, all of that, they're there, aren't they?
Exactly. It's like, what do I have to do more of or be more of, or am I too much? Am I not enough? All about this. This is me that's the problem, and I'm going to have to adapt in some way, keep adapting to try to be okay by the world.
And that's a lot of work on your nervous system, isn't it? To feel it.
Yeah.
When so much of their awareness is around the thoughts all the time.
Yeah. And it's a big
Thinking,
risk.
thinking.
When I invite them not to, it's kind of crikey. I'll go through 2 stages, often with hustlers, 2-stage therapy. The first stage, they'll come back and they'll say, oh, I did it my way and people were okay with me, thank goodness. And I say, oh, that's great. That's level 1. Bad news, level 2, because level 2 is, I need us to find out that when they're not okay with you, you can still be okay.
You can still cope. That's hard, isn't
And that's super hard. So,
rejection.
Yeah. And that's the bit where we need that evidence. I use an analogy about a lucky penny in the book where I say, this is that part of our brain. If we fly with a lucky penny, our brain will persuade us that that's what kept us safe.
I know.
And if we are a hustler and we have charmed and organised and harmonised and mediated and mollified, our brain will tell us that's why we've survived.
I know. We believe those thoughts.
Yeah.
It brings comfort.
It does. It brings a certain sense of predictability in a world that's otherwise chaos.
I know. I'm thinking of my clients.
Bet,
I can see them there sat in front of me.
Yeah.
My book, Choose You, is out now and offers some deep dive reflective questions to help you identify some of the patterns in your life that may be holding you back. Packed full of tools, exercises, and therapy-inspired insights to help you with building more self-awareness. Choose You, out now. So the 4th profile.
The 4th profile, yes. So while we have this hustler, and that hustler's relationship with need was this idea of, well, I might be able to work at the edges. I might be able to kind of direct this from the wings to help myself get what I need. The bridge is actually a kind of a stage towards more passive. It's the, you know what, I do need stuff and I do need people, but I basically have to take what I get.
Okay.
I have to accept life as it's given and be okay with it. And so one of the adaptations we see in the bridge is this easygoing, relaxed, laid back, happy-go-lucky, low-maintenance person. That's the adaptation they've made in order to not make any demands on the world.
Be hidden.
Yeah, be hidden.
Don't stand out.
Be a passenger. That's the
be
way
a passenger.
I
You
describe it.
did. That was perfect. That was perfect.
And you can be a passenger and you're along for the ride, so you have relationship, but you aren't necessarily ever in the driving seat or even invited to navigate. There's a sense that you can be here if you make no demands on the world.
Yeah. So how do you, specifically with that one, how do you help move someone from that profile into, it's a big $1 million question, I know, but just beginning to think about how we move from one profile where they can see it and benefit from not being it. How would you move them forward?
Well, for that profile in particular, so when we were looking at these missing pieces, vulnerability for the rock, empathy and trust for the gladiator, self-acceptance for the hustler, what we have for the bridge is power. In their blind spot is the fact that they do have some power.
Okay.
And our work as a therapist with a bridge is about recognizing what power they do have. So we might even start in the therapy room, you know, in the way that I can think about bridges who would physically come into a therapy room. Where would you like me to sit? Is it okay if I sit here? You'd see that they wouldn't even move a cushion, even though clearly that they've all sort of like screwed up in the corner of the sofa. They're gasping for a drink. They wouldn't dream of drinking the water that you've provided for them. There's just a sense of, unless you're going to give them that permission explicitly, they might not even notice that they were thirsty.
No. Oh, goodness. So not even aware of their core basic needs.
That shutdown has had to happen. So for me, it might even be about bringing their attention to their bodily sensations.
Yes.
You know, what's going on for you? What can you feel?
Yeah.
Even if we can get to the point of, you need a wee. You want to go?
Yeah.
Like, how can we kind of almost go back to those little years about you can have a voice, you can have a need, you can ask for what you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can say not like that, like this.
But they're an adult. And they're bringing such adaptations from childhood into adult life, aren't they?
Yeah, such a kind of freeze fawn response.
It's just there. And this will lead me on to, I ask my Instagram community, as I do for every podcast, questions they might have. So questions from the community as such, because I really appreciate the community I have. And I really do value them. And I actually wanted to have a big chat with you about Instagram and profiles, because I did hear you talking on a podcast about your position on Instagram and your profile of The Rock. And I'm wondering whether we might do another podcast in the future about Instagram and profiles, because there's so much there of how people behave and how we're being perceived on Instagram, etc., etc. Particularly as therapists who, I'm quite non-self-disclosing.
Yeah.
So I'm very careful of what I share.
And now I'm forcing myself to break some of my own internal rules around that, which is interesting.
Yes, I think we have to, but it's difficult when it's ingrained.
Yeah.
But anyway, I've asked my beautiful Instagram community some questions, but obviously I couldn't ask them, do you have any questions around what are your blind spots? Because they wouldn't actually know what their blind spots were. So what I did instead was ask them, what are some patterns of behaviour they wish they didn't have or that they were noticing? And I was inundated, actually. And I was just like, this is so wonderful that there is an awareness of patterns of behaviour. I don't think they realise what their part in it is.
Yes.
But they're realising that they are repeating patterns. And one that came up was people-pleasing. I mean, literally scroll to scroll, people-pleasing. That's the I won't drink the water, or where do I sit?
Yeah.
So coming to that kind of people-pleasing pattern of behaviour, profile away.
Oh, well, do you know what? I think you could see, and this is interesting, because I wrote a whole book about how to stop people pleasing.
I know
that was
you
my
did.
first book.
I know you did.
And I had 4 profiles in that as well. So clearly for me, 4 profiles. It's all right, I'll send you a copy. Send you a copy.
So sorry.
4 profiles all about how we organise ourselves around people-pleasing behaviour, because I think that a people pleaser genuinely could be any one of those 4 profiles in What Am I Missing? Which sounds strange.
No, it's not, because I felt it danced between all 4. So, yes.
Because we can recognise, as a rock, part of my people-pleasing behaviour is duty. What is my duty? How often should I visit my mother in her care home? How often should I invite my father around for Sunday dinner? How often should I go and be part of the summer fair at my daughter's school? What's the expectation on me to, see my friends? Duty is part of my kind of people-pleasing. So for me, if I don't deliver on my duty, I feel guilty. And that's my kind of relationship. I'm sort of like, do I want to feel guilty? I mean, this is where people say, why don't you write in a gratitude journal? Because I have a guilt and responsibility and resentment ledger that I complete every night. Like, that's my life.
That's perfectly
Because this is that balance of responsibility over responsibility in a rock.
We could have an entire podcast on just people pleasing, couldn't we, as well?
Oh,
I know we could. And I'm going to do that with you.
There's
I know
a
I am.
series.
There is. And I was so conscious of the people pleasing dancing through. It's such and obviously all of us want to please others to a certain extent. I think we need to let go of the no people pleasing.
Right.
Because we all have an element of wanting to belong.
Yeah.
But it's finding that balance, isn't it?
It is.
Okay, thank you.
So I can definitely see the rock doing it. I can see the gladiator doing it. Not that others might notice it, but if you picture that CEO in a boardroom full of kind of confidence and ambition and determination, there is someone who they're seeking to please, whether that's someone in their past or a projection.
You're so right.
There'll be an expectation they have of themselves that drives some of that behaviour.
Of course.
And the hustler, I think the hustler's a brilliant example of a people pleaser, because they will try so hard not to displease anyone that sometimes actually they lose their way entirely, because they're sort of begging from Peter to pay Paul. They're over-promising, they're under-delivering, they're here, there and everywhere, they're double-booked. And what they find is that they've run themselves ragged trying to let no one down.
So their boundaries and their ability to say no, to put themselves first is just...
No.
Okay, that's with the hustler.
Yeah, and the bridge tends to have... It's almost like when I think about the hustler and the bridge is this kind of, it's suddenly the quiet. It gets quiet and the air goes out of it. There's like, the bridge is much more of that freeze response that we would talk about within a trauma context. That idea of, I'm actually just going to be neutral here.
Okay.
I'm going to receive whatever is projected onto me.
That is like a freeze, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just.
So I'm just going to go along with
Yes.
what's here. And sometimes I'll see my bridges coming through toxic relationships, and on the other side of them, having to kind of, as we would in trauma work, reactivate some of those feelings and responses for them to recognise, actually, wow, I really went to that bridge place of accepting this bad behaviour.
Yeah.
Because the reward was relationship.
Yes. And that mattered to them.
Yeah, that mattered to them.
That mattered to them.
So I think you see pleasing behaviours all the way through, as you said, as you would, because so much of this is based on adaptation and...
Thank you. I love the way you explained that. Thank you for all of them. Then there was one around lack of identity and copying, which I thought was very interesting in a social media world.
Hi, hustlers.
There we go. So, okay. So
It's not a big problem for rocks, because rocks tend to have much more of that kind of self-contained, isolated view. So they can actually shut themselves off in a slightly more avoidantly attached way.
Okay.
From comparison and competition often. We'll all wobble and have different kind of ways of processing things at different times. But the hustler is the one who I see just filled with self-doubt when they've spent too long doom scrolling on Instagram, when they've started to wonder whether they're good enough, because it's all about relativity to other people's view of them.
Okay.
So this idea of, sometimes I talk about how we grow up, and I use an example of, when we're really little, we put our coat on because our mother tells us to. Then the idea is we go through kind of toddlerhood, teenagerhood, and we don't put our coat on because our mother told us to. And the idea being we're going to come out the other side and be able to put our coat on even though our mother told us to. Helen looks at Gia. Gia nods. Gia puts coat on. How strange. And in that example, what we're saying is we want to come out from this idea of our behaviour is relative to an authority.
Yeah.
Hustlers can get stuck between compliance and defiance. Like, I want to be me, but I don't want to be rejected, but I want to be included, but I don't want to be judged. So that's where we can see that kind of identity piece really flare up.
It's a big piece of work.
Yeah.
It's a really big piece of work. I thought it was a really interesting blind spot, although they didn't realise they were showing me a blind spot.
Exactly.
I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah.
But the sadness, again, there's sadness underneath all of them, because there's vulnerability underneath all of them.
Yeah.
I don't think I've got time for any more questions.
Oh.
So I'm so sorry. But the one last question before we just talk about your book and where it's available was just a nod to my own book, but was one question, which was, what does it mean to you to choose you?
What a great question, and what a great book, because to choose you, it's everything, isn't it? To kind of recognise that there is a you.
Yes.
And that there is a choice.
Yeah.
And that you can make it. So important. For me, the choose you is always going to come back to that piece about duty, guilt, resentment, responsibility. And I know I joke about it, but genuinely I spent an hour and a half in supervision yesterday working through how to park or let go or process or move past guilt in order to choose me. Because so much for me is everyone else done? Is everyone else okay? Is everything else sorted? Oh, is there any time left? And that's not the same as choose me.
No, it's not.
So I had a very interesting conversation with my husband actually saying, do you know what, and there's a very morbid backstory to this, but it was if I knew when my checkout date was, as in if I knew how long I had left, I said, do you know what I think I'd do? I think I'd stop writing non-fiction, I'd write a psychological thriller, and I'd have more dogs.
And there's your answer.
And there's my answer.
There's your answer.
There's my answer. And yet I had to put that kind of cap, that limit that says...
I love your answer. I love your answer. And I think what's so wonderful about it is it ties into those books around the regrets of the dying, doesn't it? But it's fascinating work. And I think you're right. There was your answer.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So when's the psychological thriller
coming out?
I know, right?
Out? Well, I've already got a dachshund on a waiting list.
I've got dachshund.
Have you?
Yes. And a golden retriever.
Oh, that's so funny. I've got 2 golden retrievers.
Have you?
And I'm looking to add a dachshund. Isn't that funny?
Oh, what are your golden retrievers called?
Willow, and she's 14
Oh,
and
she's
a
an old
bit.
lady.
And Betty, who's 2.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I know. And I'm very much in my avoidantly attached rock-like succession planning.
Yes, I hear you. No, I know. It's very hard. We've got a miniature Dachshund who is 8, called Lamoni.
Lamoni.
Yeah, well, one of my children was going to be called Lamoni, and then I decided it probably wasn't fair. So you've got Georgia
very
instead.
Happy with that name.
And then I've got Luna, who is 5.
Luna.
Golden retriever. But Emma, your book, I'm going to show the camera. So it's What Am I Missing? And it's out now, available everywhere, and it's doing so well, isn't it, Emma? So it's a fabulous book. I urge everyone to read it, to put all your sticky marks in it, to get your pencil and write in it. Emma, it's been so gorgeous to have you
It
here.
has been
and
such a pleasure.
I've absolutely loved it, and I would absolutely love to invite you back to talk
Great.
more.
Anytime.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.